Everyone, welcome to our first seminar of our Social and Cultural Context of Education class in the winter of 2017. Today our group, consisting of Anthony, Julia, Joanne, and Tracy, will discuss the implications of social class on education and learning. We will be sharing and referencing a number of articles from our research, sharing key considerations of social class and indicating how those considerations might inform our professional practice. How each student experiences the classroom and their opportunity to learn is impacted by the intersection of many factors. Before we drill down deeper into this topic, we want to emphasize that social class is one important factor and should not be considered in isolation, but instead as a part of the intersection of many factors listed here on this diagram. However, to us, in our research, social class refers to income, family status, and perhaps a few more of the ideas on the diagram that's moving on your screen now. In our discussion as a group, we even found that access to mobile tech can also be an indicator of income for students and intersects with social class. Anyone in the classroom in the last little while has had that moment where students, usually in the upper elementary class and above, but increasingly younger, say, "Hey sir, miss, what kind of phone is that?" That question they're asking you is an attempt to find out more about you and could be their opportunity to see how the intersection of some of these things has resulted in you having a certain phone. So let's dig deeper into social class.
There are many challenges facing our students and teachers, particularly when dealing with social class. Teachers need to be cognizant of the particular needs of their students who may not have the same privileges as others. Our students are not coming to class on a level playing field. They may not have access to the same resources as others, may not have experienced the same level of support, or maybe their stress levels increase compared to their classmates because of the additional weight of a challenging home situation. Whatever the reason, these challenges have become ingrained in our classrooms and communities, and the need to recognize and address them is essential. Upon graduation from teacher education programs, most candidates are bright-eyed and optimistic about the adventures they are about to embark upon. Many have an idea as to the type of student or students they will be teaching. Who will they be? Where will they come from? What will their experiences be? In her article, Not Me in the Inner City, Anita Jack Davies was invited to lecture at a teacher education program and asked the candidates who intended to teach at a Canadian inner city school. Approximately 5 students of over 300 expressed an interest. A study conducted by the Wall Network showed Canada's teaching profession were more likely to be female, 75%, and white, 95%, than most other occupational groups. Research shows that teacher education programs across North America tend to attract young, white, middle-class females who are heterosexual and who desire to teach students who are much like themselves. In that case, would they expect to be teaching at inner-city schools? And the bigger question, would they be prepared? Would a dominant group of teacher candidates recognize their position of power and, according to Jack Davies, its relationship to the unequal educational outcomes for racialized students? As Jack Davies mentioned in her article, when we think of inner-city schools, we often think of American high schools, like those portrayed in Dangerous Minds or Freedom Writers. Inner-city schools are defined by the Toronto District School Board as those with a large percentage of students living in poverty. Low social class or poverty and those that attend inner-city schools is increasingly being linked to new immigrant settlement. Canadian cities can be racialized spaces where issues of race are materially and symbolically represented. Racialized people represent 13.4% of Canada's population, where new immigrants often settle in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. The main focus of the Jack Davies article was the level of unpreparedness amongst teacher candidates. They do not formally learn about inner city and urban schooling issues during their teacher education. Out of the 13 education programs here in Ontario, only 3 of them formally provide urban teacher education. Teacher candidates' beliefs about urban and inner city schooling suggest that teacher candidates not only have limited experience with inner city schooling contexts, but often hold troubling attitudes toward inner-city schools, students, and parents.
The intersection of social class gender was particularly vital in Jas Kieran Dillon's study that focused on the accounts of girls on the street and their experiences in school. Their unfortunate circumstances often led to their exclusion from educational circles and exploitation of young women. They studied the struggles of these young women in 3 cities, Halifax, Vancouver, and Saskatoon, and found that their exclusion was directly linked to race, gender, ethnicity, ability, citizenship, and sexual orientation. And yet each individual experience was unique. They were not actually lazy from her findings, but in fact let down by the educational institutions and social institutions meant to protect them. Her research question was, how do young women and girls living in poverty and experiencing homelessness in Canada describe, understand, and make sense of their secondary school experiences? Her research method was qualitative, and she encouraged young girls to participate in the project in order to share insight, knowledge, and experience. Her constraint was she only had access to those who were in youth-based organizations, so there would be a number of voices which are not represented. Often, these young girls and women were forced into a dilemma of prostitution or sleeping rough. They were rejected from schools due to their transient home situation. They faced double standard with regard to sex and their choices from both students and other people in the community. They may face bullying because of their choices and because of their social status and class. If in the case of First Nation youth, they may experience racism. They may also face a lack of connection with their teaching institution and the curriculum that employing. Things like history, language, customs would not be targeted for First Nation youth, and they would feel alienated in the study. So those are some of the problems that she expresses in her research. And a couple of the solutions that she came up with, which we're going to talk about a little later in the presentation, is the idea that you have to acknowledge an intersectionality between gender, poverty, and access to school. She also mentions about the politics of caring. Teachers are in a strong position to recognize what's going on and may make allowances and help girls who are at risks or experiencing homelessness and make them feel safe whenever possible. Schools can be a great place for protection, and also this can be a great opportunity for teachers to show genuine care, protect young girls and women from violence, physical, toxic interpersonal relationships, systematic marginalization and social marginalization from peers, and most importantly, listen to their stories and help.
We can never know the stress that some of our students may be under as they enter our schools. Whether it be an argument with a parent, lack of food, sleep deprivation, or an unstable living environment, our students may be dealing with a whole host of issues before they even begin their school day. Creating a safe school environment should be a priority in all demographics. Our students may feel that they are being judged, embarrassed, ashamed, or even trained not to share their home life situation. Being aware of the signs of stress, even with those students who don't teach, will help to build a community-wide support system to facilitate student success. Our role as educators continues to evolve to meet the changes and needs of the students in which we are involved. This also makes it important to take care of our own mental wellness so that we are able to provide a caring and nurturing environment. In some communities, students with lower income families, and especially at-risk street youth, might not have access to internet tools, mobile tools at home. Having limited or no access to technology can also mean no access to the support they need or hinder their technology skills in bring your own device school communities. By providing before and after school internet availability, as well as informing students and families of free internet access at the library or local community centers could help to close the gap of digital accessibility. Involving the community to help build a learning environment that supports 21st century skills will ensure that students in need will not be left behind.
So how can we integrate the ideas of social class into our practice or teaching? Well, recently I taught a lesson this week in Canadian history about life in the 1930s, specifically during the Great Depression. In this lesson, I invited students to participate in a role play where they were to imagine if their family was suddenly devoid or had lost its steady monthly income due to job loss or redundancy. What happened was the students actually had to write applications for unemployment relief, and I assigned 3 students to have a look at these applications as sort of administrators, and they were instructed to give out vouchers, little photocopied vouchers, that represented food, clothing, and housing to those people and their stories that they felt were truly in need. At the end of the role play, students were invited to reflect upon the experience, and I guess I should mention that I gave some direction to the administrators that if someone seemed like they were faking, or they, in the case of the 1930s, they had a phone which was a luxury item, or somehow they slipped up that they were well off, they were to have that claim denied. And also the amount of money they might have, or whether they have steady housing, could disqualify them from getting vouchers. I also asked them to kind of imagine what it would be like if they were discriminated upon other factors, which I didn't ask them to do, but things like race, culture, even language proficiency, and genders or appearance could be a number of different factors. So here were some of their responses in a word cloud that I put together after they'd written their responses. And the larger words indicate the ones that were most repeated in their reflection. So it did show that they had done some reflecting upon the experience, and they mentioned to me that they had a sort of a greater understanding of what it was like. So I sort of saw a lot of connections in this activity to the Dillon article that I mentioned before. Were those applying for unemployment down to the individual's choice? Did they choose to be like that, similar to the young girls in those unfortunate situations of poverty, homelessness, and prostitution? Or were there other factors, like in the case of the 1930s, were there financial failures in society in which there was widespread economic suffering that could then result in a number of people losing their jobs and applying for unemployment? So we kind of linked, we had a great discussion on that. We linked discussion with experiences today in the fact that many in Canada and around the world would have to apply for unemployment. We discussed the idea of privilege, which came up in the beginning of the course, and also the need for social programs for support, unemployment insurance, welfare as a safety net. We talked about off-shooting problems, things like alcohol, sheltering for victims of domestic abuse, people that have lost their home, and even things like having enough money to travel to and from this office to apply for unemployment, or to travel to a food bank. These are considerations that a number of us in privilege don't always consider. And then finally, taking a wider perspective for the course, we're looking at the events of the 20th century through the lens of various cultural gender groups at all times. We're always looking through the lens of men, women, French Canadian, Aboriginals, African Canadians, immigrants, Asians, European immigrants, and in quotations, enemy aliens, plus many more to consider. And we also would consider the factors of social class and the intersectionality of factors to best understand our understanding of the past. So I hope that's been an example of how you could integrate a social class into your practice. And so to conclude, we've come up with a list of recommendations for supporting all our students from all social classes. First thing is to mention that we should know that students come to school with an invisible backpack, some fuller than others, and people often judge the students by their appearance and take guesses at their social class. Social class is a factor that affects students inside and outside the class. Take the time to learn your students' situations and provide them with the care and concern they require to be successful at school. Provide genuine care. Focus on the individual needs, not one size fits all, but consider the politics of caring and do what you can to help. Provide a safe and engaging class school environment. Students need to feel that school is safer than the streets or anywhere else. Take the time to review the Ontario Safe School Act, and as well as the Ministry of Education's Safe and Accepting Schools resources and supports. The appropriate education has to start in teacher education programs so that teacher candidates feel more prepared to work in schools for students from all social classes. But it should not stop there. Practicing teachers need to train on mitigating the impact of social class on an individual's progress in school, and the risk for impoverished women, especially with the intersection of gender and social class, gender identity and social class as well. There's no way for educators to know how to handle all situations, but they should at least find comfortable trying and knowing where to go to get support. And then finally, schools and teachers need to develop strong connections to other social agencies in order to be able to access help when needed. As Dylan said in the article, we need to have strengthening of collaborative relationships between schools and community organizations and institutions that are attempting to address the continuum of social, material, and emotional needs. For young girls at risk, especially important, but it also applies to all our students. Thanks for listening.